Hi, I'm Lance Simard.
Hi, I'm Justine Burke,
Welcome to the Pharma Files.
where medicine meets mystery.
We are jumping right into a story today that is, without a doubt, the most consequential event in modern pharmaceutical history.
Oh, absolutely. It's a disaster so profound that it didn't just, change a few regulations.
Yeah.
It completely tore down and rebuilt the entire global framework for every single drug you or I might take. We're talking, of course, about thalidomide.
It really is the ultimate cautionary tale.
Mhm.
And what's so fascinating to explore is how this one pill, this small, unassuming tranquilizer that was specifically designed to bring calm,
Right.
how that became the ultimate symbol of catastrophe.
It forces you to confront these huge dangers, the danger of untested assumptions, the limits of science when it's up against, commercial urgency.
And the staggering cost of just taking certainty for granted.
Exactly. So for you, the listener, this exploration is really a shortcut to understanding the history that's embedded in every single warning label you read, every clinical trial protocol that exists today.
Okay, so let's start with the drug itself, because to really get the sense of betrayal,
Yeah.
you have to understand the trust first.
You do.
And the sources, they paint this picture of a pill that was just engineered to look harmless.
Oh, completely. We're talking about these small, smooth tablets, pastel blues, creams.
Almost like candy?
Right. The design itself was meant to calm you down before the drug even touched your bloodstream.
And that whole aesthetic was a huge part of its marketing. It was framed not just as a medicine, but as this kind of kindness.
A comfort, yeah. A comfort that modern chemistry could provide to this, stressed out, anxious world of the late 1950s.
And the target audience was massive.
Huge. Anxious patients, yes. Insomniacs who are just desperate for a good night's sleep. But the market that really blew it up and ultimately sealed its fate.
Pregnant women.
Pregnant women. Specifically those struggling with the crippling nausea and exhaustion of morning sickness.
The sales pitch was so simple, so seductive. Rest without danger, calm without consequence.
And to really get why that pitch landed so well, you have to understand the context of sedation at the time.
Right. Medicine in the 50s was deeply wary of sleep aids, and for very good reason.
Absolutely. The memory of barbiturate deaths was very fresh. Barbiturates were the standard, and they were effective, but they were notoriously unforgiving.
They had this sharp edge.
A very sharp edge. The risk of fatal respiratory suppression. If you just slightly misused them or accidentally took too many, that was it. The line between a therapeutic dose and a deadly one, it was razor thin.
So when thalidomide comes along, it's seen as this genuine revolutionary breakthrough.
It's the anti-barbiturate. It could give you this profound, deep sleep, but, and this is the key, it didn't suppress breathing. Clinically, morally, it just seemed inherently safe.
The initial results must have been so reassuring.
So reassuring that the promotional materials became incredibly confident, almost arrogant in their claims.
What are they saying?
They stressed its gentleness over and over. They suggested it was appropriate for everyone, adults, the elderly, even children, and specifically for use during pregnancy.
They actually marketed it as being so safe that you couldn't overdose on it.
They claimed it was impossible, and that was the crucial narrative, the thing that allowed it to move so freely into homes all over the world.
But all of this trust, this whole revolutionary promise, it was all built on one massive, systemic, and ultimately fatal assumption.
Yes, an assumption that underpinned pretty much all of pharmacology at the time.
The idea of the placenta as a perfect barrier.
A magical filter. The thinking was logical, on the surface, but it was completely unproven.
If the drug is safe for the mother,
Then the placenta will screen everything out, making it automatically safe for the developing fetus. Very few people in medicine felt the need to question that, and more importantly, no one felt the need to prove it was true.
and because no one was asking those questions, the drug's justable.
Mm-hmm.
It slipped so easily into routine care.
It was everywhere, distributed as free samples to doctors to hand out casually.
It became the go-to recommendation for morning sickness, which, can be an incredibly debilitating condition.
It can. And this was seen as a compassionate thing to do. There was just zero reason, based on the science of the time, to think this quiet little pill carried any specific long-term risk for the developing baby.
Which is why the collapse of trust was so sudden and so total.
In just a few short years, thalidomide went from being a symbol of modern risk-free kindness to the absolute symbol of catastrophe.
And a lesson that was just etched into history by the victims, was that safety isn't some inherent trait of a chemical.
No, it's a hypothesis, and it's one that must be proven across every population, especially the most vulnerable, and across every single phase of biological development.
So to really understand how a failure on this scale could even happen, you have to zoom out from the pill itself and look at the broader environment.
The 1950s. The post-war pharmaceutical boom.
There was this perfect storm of conditions that allowed risk to just be completely overlooked.
It really was. You had this overwhelming atmosphere of progress. Post-war Europe wasn't just rebuilding cities, it was rebuilding faith in science.
In ingenuity.
Exactly. Antibiotics, the polio vaccine, new types of anesthesia. Science was seen as this inevitable path to salvation. And chemistry specifically had this aura of being almost invincible, the key to solving human suffering.
And the economic energy behind that was just ferocious.
Oh, yeah. Pharmaceutical companies were popping up everywhere, all of them eager to commercialize new compounds at, warp speed.
But the regulations, which always move by tradition, simply couldn't keep pace.
Not at all. Innovation was moving at supersonic speed, and oversight was not. It was a genuine asymmetry. New drugs were flooding the market faster than these small, limited regulatory bodies could even hope to assess them.
And the standard for regulation back then was, it's breathtakingly narrow by today's standards.
It is. Drug approval rested almost entirely on one single question. Will this drug cause immediate, acute harm to an adult?
So what does that mean in practice? What were they actually testing for?
Acute toxicity. Basically, if you took the drug and you didn't immediately get sick, have a seizure, or, die from respiratory failure within a few hours or a day.
It was generally considered okay for the market.
Right. The focus was entirely on immediate survivability in a grown adult.
Which means the blind spots were just massive.
Huge. The idea that a drug could cause delayed harm or indirect harm, especially harm that was specific to the unique biology of a developing fetus, that was poorly understood. So it was completely left out of standard testing.
So the concept of teratogenicity, causing birth defects, that wasn't a standard hurdle for new drugs.
It was a known risk for certain industrial chemicals, sure, but it wasn't a routine test for consumer pharmaceuticals. Not at all.
So we didn't have the kind of rigor we expect now. No long-term safety studies.
Very uncommon. Reproductive toxicology wasn't a standard requirement. And clinical trials, as we think of them today, randomized, double-blind, controlled, they were still evolving.
So approval often just came down to a doctor's judgment.
A doctor's judgment, anecdotes, and a whole lot of general optimism.
And it's into this environment that this company, Chemie Grünenthal, steps in.
Yes. A young, very ambitious German firm. They were eager to break into the market, establish themselves against the big pharma giants of the day.
And their strategy was pretty smart. They saw a huge need in the market.
A new sedative. The existing options, the barbiturates, were effective but just too unforgiving, too easy to overdose on, too habit-forming, and they had that fatal respiratory risk.
So Grünenthal needed a tranquilizer that could offer calm without that lethal edge.
And thalidomide seemed perfect. The early, very basic testing focused only on that acute toxicity in animals.
And the results looked good by the standards of the time.
They looked great. The test subjects got drowsy, they slept, and they survived. Crucially, there were no dramatic warning signs, no seizures, no sudden organ damage, no death. It was just categorized as harmless.
And since there was no regulatory requirement to look at reproductive effects or long-term harm,
the path to market was swift and clear. It was launched in Germany in 1957. The brand name was Contergan.
And the spread from there was just astonishingly fast.
It wasn't just Germany. Within a couple of years, it was available across almost all of Europe, Australia, Asia, Africa.
Prescription requirements were all over the place.
Very inconsistent. In some places, you could just get it over the counter. The regulatory oversight just could not keep up with its distribution.
And that rapid, lightly regulated global spread is what directly led to its use in pregnancy.
Absolutely. By the late 1950s, doctors were recommending it for morning sickness, often under a different name, like Distaval in the UK. And this was seen as this compassionate, low-risk thing to do, despite the cold, hard fact that there was zero testing for its effects on fetal development.
The system just failed to ask the most basic question.
What happens when this drug crosses the placental barrier? Nobody asked.
What's incredible when you look back is how much effort went into actually engineering the trust around this drug. The illusion of safety wasn't an accident.
No, it was carefully manufactured, strategic language, imagery. They knew what they were doing.
They really leveraged the public's fear of the older sedatives, didn't they?
Completely. The marketing language hammered on words like non-toxic and non-addictive. Now, if you're hearing that in the 1950s, given the dependency and, the lethality of sleeping pills, that sounds like a miracle.
It framed safety as just an inherent quality of the drug.
Right, not a conditional one. And then they took it a step further with the visuals.
The ads with children.
Ads featuring happy families, pictures of children, all subtly signaling that this drug was gentle and trustworthy enough for even the most sensitive people.
And doctors were reassured they could prescribe it daily, indefinitely, without any consequences.
The medical world really operated on that good faith. The assumption was if modern chemistry made it, it must be safe unless there's explicit proof otherwise.
This brings us right back to that giant gaping flaw in the science of the time.
The placental blind spot.
The comforting but totally wrong assumption that the placenta was a perfect filter.
It was a catastrophic gap in scientific understanding. Because thalidomide didn't cause any acute toxicity in the mother, just, drowsiness, maybe some mild neurological stuff, there were no immediate warning signs to challenge that belief.
It's the subtle nature of the drug that made it so devastatingly deceptive.
Exactly. I mean, if it had caused, say, acute liver failure in the mother, doctors would have stopped prescribing it instantly.
Of course.
But because the immediate effects were so benign, the silent damage just continued, completely unchecked.
So let's talk about the mechanism, because this is where the real scientific tragedy is. What was it actually doing?
It was interfering with a process called angiogenesis.
Which is the formation of new blood vessels.
Right. Now, in a mature adult, where your blood vessels are already established, that's a pretty subtle effect. But in a developing embryo, angiogenesis is absolutely foundational to the entire construction project.
So it's like interrupting the delivery of vital supplies to a building site.
That's a perfect analogy. It's like cutting off the delivery of steel beams and plumbing. If you disrupt that vascular growth, which is the life support and delivery system for the embryo, you completely derail the precise sequential construction schedule.
Limbs, organs, facial structures, they all depend on that schedule.
They're all dependent on that strict schedule of vascular supply.
And this explains why the harm was so delayed and internal. The drug itself, it leaves the body relatively quickly.
Right, metabolizes out. But the permanent, irreversible damage had already been done during those critical early weeks of construction.
Silent destruction.
Completely silent. And it only manifested itself visibly, tragically, months later at birth, long after that momentary calm from the pill had been forgotten.
The scientific community must have spent years trying to figure out how this supposedly mild drug could cause such specific, severe harm.
They did, and the answer is in its precision. It wasn't a generalized poison.
That distinction is so important.
It's paramount. It wasn't simple poisoning, which usually leads to, random damage or organ shutdown. This was different. This was like a precise surgical strike against a fundamental process.
You've described it as an interruption to a construction timeline.
That's exactly what it is. It causes structures to just stop building at a very precise moment.
So on a molecular level, what's happening?
It suppresses the signals that are required to promote new blood vessel formation. Now, in an adult, that might show up as something like peripheral neuropathy, that tingling or numbness in the fingers and toes.
A bit of nerve damage.
Subtle nerve damage. The adult system is robust enough to handle it. But in an embryo, it's a completely different story.
Because that's when everything is being built for the first time.
It's a sprint of rapid cell division and critically intense vascularization. When thalidomide cuts off blood vessel formation, you get reduced blood flow to the areas where limbs are supposed to be elongating, where organs are forming.
And without that blood supply, everything just stalls.
It stalls. Cells die, or they just fail to become what they were supposed to become.
And you can see that precise interruption in the physical outcome. The damage wasn't random at all.
No, it resulted in these highly specific, recognizable malformations. It was proof that the drug was interfering with the embryo's exact blueprint.
And the defining defect was, of course, the failure of limbs to elongate, leading to phocomelia.
Right. That's the chilling medical term for hands or feet attached close to the torso, often called seal limbs.
But it wasn't just the limbs.
No, the damage was comprehensive. Severe deformities of the ears, the eyes, and critical internal organs. This very specific pattern told scientists that a specific biological process, one required at a very specific time, had been switched off.
And this mechanism, this timing, this brings us to the most scientifically illuminating but also the most tragically deceiving part of the whole story.
The narrow window of vulnerability.
Yes, the teratogenic effects, the ability to cause birth defects, it only happened in this incredibly tight window.
Between roughly days 20 and 36 after conception. It's a terrifyingly small window.
And just think about what that means for a person. Days 20 to 36. You're only in the 5th or 6th week of pregnancy.
Right. Many women haven't even missed a period yet, or if they have, they certainly don't have a doctor's appointment scheduled. They might not even know for sure that they're pregnant.
And they're taking this pill for debilitating nausea or insomnia, having no idea they've just stepped into this critical developmental minefield.
And if you took the drug outside that critical 16-day window, you might have little or no detectable harm. But even brief exposure inside that window was catastrophic and irreversible.
Which is what confused the early clinicians.
Exactly. It explained the deceptive patterns. Why did some women who took the drug have perfectly healthy babies, while others who only took it for a few days had children with severe effects?
It was all about timing.
The precise intersection of when you took the drug with the embryo's own biological clock?
The precision is just unnerving. But it does raise the question, if the mechanism is so devastating, why didn't the animal tests catch it?
And that failure is a huge lesson in comparative biology. The standard lab animals at the time, usually rodents like mice and rats, just far less sensitive to thalidomide's effects.
Their bodies process it differently.
Their developmental pathways, their metabolism, their vascular signaling, it's all different. In many species, thalidomide is just metabolized harmlessly before it can do any damage.
So the tests just reinforced the illusion of safety.
They did. You do this standard test on a mouse, nothing bad happens. And that result was interpreted as proof of safety, when in reality, the test itself was fundamentally irrelevant to human embryonic development.
So the big revelation was that harm can be delayed. It can be indirect.
And developmentally specific. Safety could no longer be defined just by the absence of immediate death in an adult animal. It had to be defined by the absence of unacceptable risk across time, across circumstances, and most critically, across multiple species that are relevant to human development.
By the early 1960s, these tragic, isolated cases started to cluster.
They did. And at first, they were dismissed as sporadic. Bad luck, a rare genetic issue, something tragic but unrepeatable.
But the numbers started telling a different and very consistent story.
Pediatricians, especially in Germany, began noticing this sudden, inexplicable spike in extremely rare limb malformations, specifically phocomelia.
A condition that was previously a medical curiosity.
Right. You might see one case every few years in a major hospital. Suddenly, they were seeing many cases within a few months.
So you have Dr. Wittiekind Lenz in Germany compiling evidence. And at the same time, thousands of miles away in Australia, an obstetrician, Dr. William McBride, is seeing the exact same thing.
The synchronicity of their discoveries is just chilling. They were both seeing this consistent pattern of deformity, and it was tied to the timing of the pregnancies and the fact that the mothers were otherwise completely healthy.
And they both, through this meticulous detective work, traced the common link back to that gentle little sleep aid.
By the autumn of 1961, the similarities were just too precise, the geographical spread was too wide, and the number of affected babies was too high to ignore it any longer.
The link was undeniable.
The drug, prescribed so casually, had crossed the placental barrier and systematically destroyed human development at its most vulnerable point.
So once a connection was made, the drug was pulled from the market pretty quickly.
It was. It was swiftly withdrawn across Europe, starting in Germany in November 1961. Prescriptions stopped, advertising stopped, product recalled.
It must have taken incredible pressure, though.
Oh, the manufacturers initially denied the link completely. They tried to attribute the birth defects to other factors.
But the tragedy was already baked in for thousands of existing pregnancies. The damage was done.
It was. The final count, when you include stillbirths, early infant deaths, and the long-term survivors, is estimated to be between 8,000 and 12,000 children affected worldwide.
8,000 to 12,000.
And the survivors became this indelible evidence of the systemic failure. They required lifelong care, countless surgeries, prosthetics, constant medical help.
Their bodies were the living proof.
They were the living, permanent, physical proof of the consequences. And that made it utterly impossible for the industry or the regulators to deny the human cost.
So this silent tragedy is exploding across Europe, and it's threatening to cross the Atlantic.
Yes, thalidomide was submitted for approval in the huge U.S. market.
But the U.S. ultimately escaped the full scale of the disaster. And it's thanks to one person and a critical delay.
In 1960, the drug, which was going to be called Kevadon in the U.S., was submitted to the Food and Drug Administration.
And the FDA at that time,
Yeah.
we need to remember what it was like.
It was small, underfunded, timelines were very flexible, and industry pressure to fast-track profitable new drugs was just routine. Applications usually got rubber stamped.
But this one application landed on the desk of Dr. Frances Oldham Kelsey.
She was a Canadian-born medical officer, pretty new to the FDA, and her skepticism turned out to be the one obstacle the drug couldn't get past.
What did she see that so many others missed?
She just found the application lacking. The safety data was thin. It was contradictory. The clinical studies that the manufacturer provided were, they were more like anecdotal reports than real science.
And most critically,
She noted the absolute lack of adequate data for its use in pregnant women.
but what made her really dig in her heels? The drug was being used all over the world.
It wasn't just the fetus she was worried about. She noticed these persistent, subtle reports coming out of Europe about peripheral neuropathy in adult patients.
The nerve damage.
The nerve damage, that was her red flag. She realized this drug was not benign, even for adults, and if it could cause subtle, delayed neurological damage, then you absolutely could not assume it was safe for the much more complex environment of a developing embryo.
So she refused to just assume it was safe. She kept sending the application back.
Repeatedly, asking for more evidence, verifiable data, specifically developmental toxicology data. And the pushback she got was immense.
The manufacturer must have been furious.
They objected fiercely. They sent more than a dozen letters of complaint. And doctors who had gotten free samples from the company were also angry.
They accused her of obstruction.
Unnecessary obstruction, stalling progress, denying Americans access to this popular, seemingly safe drug. The political and commercial pressure on her was extraordinary.
But her diligence, her refusal to budge, it bought crucial time.
Weeks and then months. And that delay, which was born out of pure scientific rigor, was just long enough for the reports of birth defects from Europe to become undeniable.
So the drug was withdrawn globally before it could be approved in the U.S.
Exactly. The U.S. dodged a catastrophic bullet. Only a very small number of Americans were affected, almost all from those clinical samples the company had handed out.
And she was recognized for it.
She was. In 1962, President Kennedy publicly commended her, gave her the Presidential Award for Distinguished Federal Civilian Service.
But her point was always that it shouldn't take a hero.
That's the essential lesson from her story. She insisted she was just doing her job. The deeper point is that the system can't rely on a lone individual. It needs to be a robust regulatory system with rules and standards designed to withstand that pressure and demand evidence, not just accept assertions. So the scale of the human tragedy, the visible, permanent injuries to thousands of children, it just made public outrage uncontainable.
This wasn't some abstract failure. The evidence was right there, in human form.
Exactly. So congressional hearings started, and they were fueled by this devastating testimony from parents who described a system built on blind faith that had just completely failed them.
The visibility of the harm made it impossible to minimize. This wasn't some theoretical debate about risk. The system had to change.
And that systemic change came in 1962 with the passage of the Comover-Harris drug amendments.
This wasn't just a reform of the FDA.
No, this was a fundamental rewrite of the social contract between the pharmaceutical industry and the public. It created the template for modern drug safety all over the world.
Right.
And it really came down to 4 critical shifts.
Okay, so what's the first big one?
Efficacy. Before 1962, a drug just had to demonstrate safety, that it didn't kill you immediately.
It didn't have to actually work.
It doesn't have to be proven to work. The Kefauver-Harris amendments demanded that companies now prove efficacy. The drug has to actually do what you claim it does, and you have to prove it with science. That was a radical change.
Okay, so efficacy is number one. What's the second shift?
Rigor and reporting. Well-controlled clinical trials, randomized, statistically powered, became mandatory. The old system of just relying on informal doctor anecdotes was gone.
And reporting became mandatory too.
Systematic collection and mandatory reporting of all adverse events became law. If something went wrong in a trial or after the drug was on the market, it had to be reported and tracked.
The third shift.
Transparency and informed consent. This was a direct response to how those thalidomide samples were distributed. Informed consent was codified. Patients had to be explicitly told if they are participating in research and informed of the risks.
It established the patient's right to know.
Exactly. And the fourth shift, the most direct consequence of the teratogenicity.
Mandatory toxicology.
Reproductive and developmental toxicology studies became standard practice. Testing across multiple species, including non-rodents, became required to assess the risk to an embryo. Pregnancy risk became a central, non-negotiable part of the process.
But maybe the biggest change of all was the philosophical one.
The shift in the burden of proof.
Explain that. Before 1962, the industry was innocent until proven dangerous.
In essence, yes. The regulators had to prove a drug was harmful after it was already on the market, causing damage.
And after Harris.
It was reversed entirely. The manufacturer now bears the burden of proof. They must prove, with rigorous evidence, that a drug is both safe and effective before a single pill can be sold.
Caution became the baseline.
It became the absolute baseline expectation. This legislation built the entire architecture of modern drug development, and it was a monument built on the visceral memory of this catastrophe.
The disaster didn't just create new laws, though. It permanently imprinted itself on the moral framework of medicine.
Absolutely. Especially when it comes to dealing with those who can't consent, like a fetus.
One of the most immediate and maybe most complicated aftershocks was this profound caution around pregnant women in research.
Right. In the years after 1962, pregnant women were just systematically excluded from clinical trials. The thinking was simple: protection, never again.
But that protective stance, as understandable as it was, created this enormous unintended paradox.
It created a data vacuum. By excluding pregnant patients, medicine left doctors in the dark. They were then forced to prescribe necessary medications for things like severe asthma or epilepsy during pregnancy based on, extrapolation and guesswork, not actual evidence.
So this tension is still with us today.
Dramatically so. Pregnant patients need effective treatment, but the drugs are rarely formally studied in them because of fear, liability, regulatory complexity.
Thalidomide exposed this really difficult truth. How do you ethically get the evidence you need to protect a vulnerable population without exposing them to risk?
And beyond that paradox, the disaster forced medicine to confront three really uncomfortable essential truths about itself.
The first one is that phrase we keep coming back to.
Absence of evidence is not evidence of safety. That is the silent motto of every toxicologist today.
Thalidomide was only proven dangerous because clinicians noticed the effects years later. It wasn't caught in a lab.
Because no one was looking for delayed silent harm. The medical community had to accept that the assumption that harm would announce itself loudly and immediately was just profoundly false.
The second truth was about trust.
Yes, trust in a commercial system. Medicine had operated on a kind of handshake, on the good faith of manufacturers. Thalidomide showed that commercial pressure, scientific optimism, and incomplete testing could combine disastrously, even without malicious intent.
So trust has to be earned.
It has to be systematically earned through transparency, verifiable data, and external scrutiny. It can't just be assumed.
And the third truth.
Active anticipatory protection for vulnerable populations. Fetuses, infants. They have no voice. They can't consent to risk. So the regulatory structures have to be designed to anticipate harm on their behalf, to set the highest possible bar for evidence rather than just reacting after the damage is done.
So thalidomide permanently unsettled medicine's conscience.
It did. It showed that systemic failure often comes not from bad intent, but from comfortable assumptions and flawed systems that value speed over meticulous, evidence-based caution.
The molecule itself, thalidomide, it became a pariah. It existed only as a warning for decades.
It was untouchable. But then, this classic scientific paradox happened. Researchers started to revisit its mechanism of action.
And they realized something profoundly ironic.
They realized that the exact mechanism that caused the disaster, its ability to inhibit angiogenesis and its powerful immune-modulating properties, was incredibly potent.
In a formed adult human, its destructive power could be repurposed.
It could be used as a highly targeted therapeutic tool. The context changed everything. When you apply it to specific diseases driven by abnormal vascular growth or runaway inflammation, it can be incredibly effective.
So this led to its reintroduction.
A very cautious, highly controlled therapeutic reintroduction in the late 20th century. First, it showed dramatic relief in a painful complication of leprosy.
And later in cancer treatment.
Yes, its anti-angiogenic properties proved crucial in treating certain blood cancers, most notably multiple myeloma, where it helps starve rapidly growing tumor cells of their blood supply.
But this return was nothing like its first launch.
Oh, not at all. It was a masterclass in controlled risk management. Thalidomide came back not as a benign sedative, but as a tightly regulated, high-risk therapy.
And it proved that even a catastrophically dangerous drug can be used responsibly if the system anticipates the maximum risk.
And the controls around it today are the most stringent in medicine. It's the case study for all high-risk drugs. Every single patient, male or female, has to enroll in a formal REMS program.
Risk evaluation and mitigation strategies.
And the program for thalidomide is exhaustive. Doctors need special certification. Pharmacies have to be registered. Female patients of childbearing age have to commit to 2 forms of contraception and undergo regular, mandatory pregnancy tests.
Every single dose is tracked.
From the manufacturer to the patient, complete oversight and accountability.
The irony is it's so powerful. The safeguards around thalidomide today exist precisely because the first version had none.
Its current utility is completely inseparable from its past failure. The molecule didn't change its behavior. Medicine changed its entire approach to risk, regulation, and evidence.
So after tracking this entire story, from the promise of that pastel pill to the law written in response to the tragedy, what is the final synthesis? What is the thalidomide's true legacy?
It fundamentally redefined the concept of safety. Before thalidomide, safety was what you could see quickly. Afterward, safety had to be demonstrated across time, across diverse populations, and across every single developmental stage.
Uncertainty itself became a risk factor.
One that had to be actively managed and mitigated.
And this forced the regulators to become predictive, not just reactive.
They now have to ask those fundamental questions before approval. What happens with long-term use? What happens when biology is changing fastest, like in an embryo? How does this drug interact with other things?
It also redefined the ethical obligation of the medical community. The urgency to relieve suffering is powerful.
But thalidomide showed how easily that urgency can override caution. From that point forward, scientific and regulatory restraint became an ethical obligation. You can't just trust chemistry, you have to prove its trustworthiness.
So every feature of modern drug development, the dense pregnancy warnings, the clinical trial phases, the black box safety labels,
they all carry the indelible imprint of thalidomide's legacy. They are the visible, expensive, and time-consuming answer to the question, why does it take so long to get a drug approved?
because the lesson wasn't theoretical.
It was visceral. It was non-abstract. It was visible in every delivery room where an affected child was born. Thalidomide reduced medicine's most dangerous sentence to its absolute essence. The moment we stop questioning, we think it's safe.
That's a powerful and sobering place to end. The industry and the regulators, they learned the hard way that certainty has to be earned through evidence and time. But let's just circle back for a moment to that difficult ethical paradox that thalidomide exposed, but never really resolved.
The exclusion of pregnant women from research.
Right. While the disaster created robust regulation to protect the fetus, it simultaneously led to their routine systemic exclusion from drug trials.
And the consequence of that exclusion is that decades later, the use of many necessary medications during pregnancy is still based on guesswork. It's based on retrospective analysis, not hard prospective evidence.
So if modern medicine is ethically built on protecting the vulnerable, how do we finally break that cycle? How do we ethically gather the evidence we need to protect pregnant patients and their babies, ensuring they get the best care, without exposing them to the very kind of risk that caused this catastrophe in the first place?
That is the open question that the shadow of thalidomide still leaves for us today. A question of safety versus knowledge that medicine continues to grapple with every single day.
Thank you for joining us for this exploration of the pharmaphiles.
We appreciate you trusting us to guide you through this material. We'll see you next time.